my next challenge for the industry is to redouble its efforts to help people understand why copyright exists and how it is that the consumers who ultimately benefit from a proper respect for those rights can understand that as part and parcel, as it were, their mother's milk. I'm sure the industry can be more than a match for this task. It is, after all, an industry with the art of persuasive communication in its DNA. But in these matters, merely winning the legal argument is not enough. The battle's for hearts and minds as well as pockets. And it must be shown that supporting copyright is all of a piece and in harmony with our culture and with our times. Last year, I launched an FDA project for the vital tween generation of 8 to 11-year-olds, many of whom are seasoned media consumers as well as dexterous users of laptops, mobiles and consoles. It was a teaching resource commissioned from Film Education designed to stimulate a balanced classroom debate during literacy, citizenship and ICT lessons about why something called copyright exists at all, and what might be the consequences to all of us if it didn't. Today, it's encouraging to report that this resource has been supplied free upon request to almost 1 in 5 primary schools in the UK. That's 4,000 out of a little over 20,000 schools. And we expect it to have at least a 5-year shelf life. That project was a start, just scratching the surface at Key Stage 2. But this is an issue that we should all be very deeply concerned with, socially and culturally as well as economically. The concept of intellectual property and its value needs to be embedded inextricably into the school's curriculum. Today's education system must prepare young minds for tomorrow's digital society, and their curious minds will expect and deserve nothing less. Let me be absolutely clear. The 3 R's will, in fact, must remain the fulcrum around which teaching is practiced. But without a confident understanding of moving images and the principles on which audiovisual communications work, then this up-and-coming generation will not be equipped with adequately informed responses to the very fluid challenges of the early 21st century. A healthy respect for copyright is pivotal to the industry's ability to produce a vibrant range of films which audiences love and which will help the economy to flourish. So my next challenge is the development of innovative resources on copyright in a digital world. Firstly for teacher training purposes, and then for interactive use by teachers in their classrooms. So building on last year's FDA Film Education Primary Schools initiative, what else can be done? Well, why not challenge young people to design their own cinemas of the future, make their own trailers, develop their mathematical skills through evaluating the latest box office receipts, considering what the budgets and financial implications might be at every step in the production of a film. These could be terrific projects to focus on and get right, rather than dissipating our efforts across too many fronts. I think it's a challenge on which all 3 sectors, film, media and government, should collaborate on, as that's probably the only way to get this essential job done. The full role for government is, in fact, even greater than this. The creative industries represent between 7 and 8% of the UK's economy, and the exercise of copyright is probably more crucial to our wealth creation than that of any other comparable nation. Whichever government is formed after the election will have exactly the same challenge, one among many, of making intellectual property a cornerstone of its policy development across every department of state. One of the most important contributions any government can make to its creative industries is to help ensure that the prevailing IP regime is both viable and robust. And as Lord Fowler's Select Committee on Communications recently recommended, a law that specifically makes camcording a criminal offence would send a clear and entirely appropriate signal that none of us in the workplace, at home, or in our local communities can afford to turn a blind eye to intellectual property theft. Moving on once more. Safeguarding IP is a hot topic for the organisers of the 2012 Olympics. I'm convinced that London will succeed in hosting the most magnificent festival of sport, an unforgettable global digital event with people watching and feeling involved through a plethora of media and in ways that have never previously been possible. But with a European football tournament scheduled as well, the summer of 2012 is going to be a very tough environment in which to pick release dates and to launch movies. Looking at some of the more recent Olympics, such as the Great Games at Sydney in 2000, the local cinemas there took not just a fortnight, but many, many months to recapture attention and get back to anything resembling normal trading. So my final challenge today is for the industry to start devising a promotional initiative for the cinema to run immediately after the London Games that reminds audiences seduced by sport that the movies have a great deal left to excite them. Brand cinema will need an imaginative and actually a rather remarkable campaign. And as I mentioned earlier, nothing can be taken for granted. The stakes are high, and in the autumn of 2012, every single admission must be contested and earned. So here's a thought. How about launching a talent competition for the public to design a campaign promoting the cinema experience itself? Give people the tools and some guidance and let them create something for you, rather than telling them what you think is right for them. Now, this is all of a piece with an article I read last weekend in Business Week. A really interesting article, I found it, by a former professor at Harvard Business School, looking back over the last 30 years and conceding that what they were teaching at Harvard Business School was very, very largely wrong. They actually misunderstood the relationship between the consumer and the organizations selling things. And I just pulled out two small quotes. She says here, in the old rules you taught, you ask, what is my product or service and how can I sell it to you? With that question, adversarialism was baked into the DNA of the buyer-seller transaction. The new rules ask, who are you, what do you need, and how can I help you get them? This creates a dynamic of advocacy and mutual accountability. The more trust you build, the more value you release, and the more wealth you create. Breaking free of the gravitational pull of the familiar requires the equivalent of an asteroid collision. Letting go is a catch-22. You don't want to let go until you have something new to cling to, but you can't discover the new thing until you let go. And she finishes by saying, the bad news is there are no maps to the future. The good news is you are the map maker. I think it was a more than interesting article, and it just serves my point, which is that it's not a bad idea sometimes to ask your customers what they think and how they'd like to be served, instead of assuming that you have all the answers. Now, one technique the distribution sector has recently developed to create demand is to pool its resources and produce generic compilation trailers. These are meticulously edited to convey the range and the quality of the stories and characters in the new season's lineup of releases, and to whet audiences' appetites with just a taste of the excitement and the emotion that's in store for them. The summer season 2010 kicks off early at the end of April, in fact, and winter should hopefully be over by then, and runs through to August. That's 4 months of enormous promise, during which time admissions equivalent to the entire UK population are anticipated to come through the doors of our cinemas. More of that in just a second. To wrap up, we see that public demand for stories on film remains sky high. But in the end, it's content that motivates people, not machinery or pipelines. I've touched on some of the huge challenges ahead regarding the role of copyright and its umbilical connection to the future success of the UK's digital economy. What's obviously needed is a new framework that balances enforcement with flexible licensing across many outlets. Platforms is already becoming a rather outdated concept. And most important of all, perhaps, is the education of our consumers. And in that respect, I think, or fear, there's still a long way to go. We also see that the UK film industry contains passionate business people as well as exceptional creative people who are very eager to realise the full potential of each release by delivering it across all manner of outlets, both established and new. So as I see it, the full benefits of a digital Britain can only be realised when the distribution sector is allowed to fire on all cylinders. Connecting content with audiences doesn't happen by luck or by accident. There's a great deal of hard work and sharp judgment involved in all of this. And as we see the UK's world-class cinema sector working tremendously hard with commitment and flexibility to manage an environment typified by fundamental change and ferocious competition, and all the while serving around 3.5 million customers every single week.